Hi there. For a while, I've been looking at this component here to create sliders that connects, So because I'm doing Daisy UI, currently it does not have a slider that will have multiple selections on it. So I've been looking at this, trying to figure out in terms of how I could just customize the style of it so that it can fit Daisy UI. So I checked the examples here, and then the unfortunate thing about this is there's not much that is documented here in terms of how you style this component. You know, the information that's basically here is a little bit scanty. For example, styling. To style the noUISlider, the default style sheets contains helpful comments to get a head start. You see, it is recommended to use the default style sheet overwriting when necessary as a starting point when restyling the noUISlider. If the styling system doesn't match the convention, says prefix and says classes. So basically, what it's saying is that you can use these particular classes that are here to style everything. The best thing to do when you want to style this is basically get it generated. Um, and then what you see, you're able to see in relation to the element definitions in terms of what's being used. Like, for example, here. So you go to inspect, and then you kind of like find in terms of how does the whole thing look like, then you can do your styling based on what is available there. So what basically I've done, I went through to the DaisyUI component, which is basically this here, where you have a range and then you are able to customize it to have the various colors, the peeps, and then the colors that are there, and then the sizes that you have, and all sorts of other things. So fortunately for me, I did work on a very close representation in relation to what could work with Daisy following this particular approach, but I couldn't make this smaller. But anyway, I fired up VS Code, and then what I was able to do is basically create a custom slider CSS where basically I'm using the same premises in terms of what is happening there. As you will recall, some of these variable CSSs are the ones that are being used by DaisyUI in relation to theming and all sorts of other things. So I followed that approach in terms of how do you make this thing work for us in relation to ensuring that it can work for us. So these are the CSS styles that I managed to build up with it. It's not perfect, but at least what you'll see, you'll be able perhaps to use it and expand on it depending on your needs. But I would like to have some inputs on this. For example, mhlambi, if you have your pull on the push request. For example, this one here is primary. So what I've done here is to say when you're handling the left handler there, then it scales a little bit up, and then you are able to drag it, and also this one here. So you're able to do this thing. So I've added a margin here of about 20 so that these things do not collide. But as you can see here, you can move the element left, right, This is the secondary color, the accent color. So this basically is using the slider as it is currently. For example, here it's defined here, the start, whether it's having a connect, tooltips, false. But of course, there are some that have tooltips that you will see here. So this is the code that is actually ensuring that all of the examples are working. Like this one here, pips and the start values, the formatters that are there, and all sorts of other things. So if you go here, you're able to see the various colors. Currently, this is not supporting any hex colors that you may use. It's just supporting the colors that come by default with DaisyUI. And then it's the sizes. So this is XS, and then this is SM, and then this is MD. The color that we're using for this one is just the primary color, and then this one is XL. Now, what I've discovered is that you see here, this one is perfectly round on the left here. You see here, this one here, it's not perfectly round. I'm still struggling to figure out how to sort that thing out. But I mean, the fact that at this particular moment, most of this functionality is working, might not necessarily worry about it. But it's still tricky for me to figure out about what is going on in relation to that part. But at the same time, you are able to drag and insert, like for example, here, you see the border thing. For whatever reason, it does that. But look here, perfect thing. So this is XL, it basically means that you are able to move your handlers. And then this here is the width, for example, where you can have different widths, full 80, 64, and also to other things. And then this one here, it talks about a stepper with a tooltip. So we've set a neutral tooltip here in relation to what is happening. As you can see here, if you drag there, it's able to scale up, and then the various other tooltips. So there's a primary range with the primary tooltip. Basically, you can change the tooltip to be whatever you want it to be in relation to the colors that are being used by DaisyUI. So I managed to basically do that via the normal class names. For example, here, this one here, I've used the range, and then the range MD, and then the range primary, which basically is just creating this particular slider here, and then using noUISlider. And then, for example, the secondary is that one. So you need to actually specify these particular class names for this thing to work like this, because in this CSS slider, it's actually built to use the variable CSS selectors, for example, based on what is happening in relation to DaisyUI. I was thinking in terms of if you're going to be able to theme this component here, then we'll be able to just use the existing colors. Like for example, tooltip primary here, it's taking the color content and then the color primary there, and then it's just applying important. I found it easier to just apply important to all of these things so that it gets to override everything that is here. Because it became very complicated to do it via code and things. So I just thought that the best way to do this is basically just to run it, and then you kind of like use the same classes that are there. So for the tooltip that you see here, you just indicate that it has a tooltip error. For example, this is a range. Let me show you the tooltips examples. Yes, for example, this is a range SM, range primary. So what telling it that it's a range basically means that use whatever classes are defined for that, and the variables, and then use whatever variables are defined for the size, use whatever variables are defined for the color, and then the tooltip that we're applying here is basically saying that whatever is in there, apply this particular color. So what we've done there is for the tooltip, for example, we've set the tooltip is that one, and then we just set the basic styling that we need for the tooltip itself. For example, we wanted to have a border radius or something like that, and then the tooltip, the color primary is that one, etc., etc., etc. So I guess with time, this can be themed in relation to the various themes that are available for DaisyUI, and then it can be customized to actually be able to work with DaisyUI if someone is up for that. But I think for my needs, basically, I'm set in relation to I'm going to be able to use this with the various functionalities that I need, like for example, showing the pips here, like 0 to 125 to 50, and all sorts of other things. And then here, where, for example, you are changing the amounts, because this one here is basically the one that I've been looking for, where, for example, you're able to, let's say that you want a loan or something like that, or you're taking a debt or whatever, then you can specify the amount. I wanted to build this thing specifically for that, where people are going to select a range of prices and all sorts of other things. But based on this, you can use most of the functionalities that are in the noUISlider component. And then, of course, I mean, this does not have much dependencies and everything else, but then it's nice to have in relation to you're able to pick your range Gs, and then you can actually like have it sitting inside of field set or something like that. So those are the things that I'm going to be looking at next in terms of how do I use this for input in a field set. But the code is very straightforward to follow, so it's basic HTML. And then what you need to do is basically just build and then you can use your code, your JavaScript, to actually change some of the things about the component itself using the existing noUISlider configurations and all sorts of things. So yeah, basically that's that. Thank you.